All right, Psalm 95. Let's call this one a season for rest. In this psalm, where the psalmist is going to say, we should sing praises to God, for he is a great God. More importantly, he is our God. And so he is going to move into talking about, in the final few verses, if you hear his voice, don't pretend like you didn't. Why? Because our ability to find rest is linked to us openly acknowledging the things that we are hearing from him. In this psalm that begins in verse 1, the Lord, let us sing praises to him, make a joyful noise to him. Into his presence, let's come with thanksgiving, once again making a joyful noise. That being verses 1 and 2, he's going to move into verses 3 through 6, saying, for he is, as we mentioned, a great God, a king above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth and the heights of the mountains. The sea is the product of the work of his hand. The dry land he formed with his hand. Let us therefore worship and bow down before him. For in verse 7a, we'll call that the first half of verse 7, he is going to say, he is our God and we are the sheep of his pasture. As the second half of the verse 7b on through verse 11 will go on to therefore say, as we mentioned, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion at Meribah or Massa, a verse that the Hebrew writer is going to refer back to in chapters 3 and 4 of the book of Hebrews, where he's going to mention that your fathers put him to the test, or the forefathers of the children of Israel put him to the test in the wilderness, even though they had seen his work for 40 years. It's going to say that he loathed that generation because they went astray in their heart. Going back to that distinction we mentioned before between personality and character. No matter what they were presenting with their mouths in terms of praise to God, in their heart, they were resisting the directions in which he was leading them. As he will once again say, they always go astray in their hearts, leading them to, my paraphrase, not know his ways. Therefore, he's going to say, in his wrath, before he has a chance to let it pass, he chose to make sure that they would never enter his rest. This chapter reminding me of the ways in which denial can be so tempting when the thing that is before us is huge or a huge problem. Understanding that it's probably a little bit easier to sympathize with the children of Israel when you realize that the spies who went in to spy out the land of promise that was ahead of them came back saying that it was a great land, but it was filled with giants, and giants meant giant problems. And so denial tended to make them want to stay put in a desert that was never going to be home. And even worse, to try to go back to a situation that was actually horrible in Egypt, where they were actually slaves. And so in denial, they were able to give themselves a moment's rest from what seemed to be huge problems ahead, only to realize that that wasn't really rest, because it wasn't in the kind of environment where they could really stretch out, for lack of a better term, in the way that God had intended for them. And so in denial, they bought themselves a moment's rest that over time infuriated God enough that he was going to deny them the rest that was truly fit for them. Which is why we sometimes say God's best to you as you go forward in him. God willing, not craving the moments or seasons of rest we can carve out for ourselves through denial, to the point where we actually deny ourselves the genuine rest that can come along with candor